Be careful when you enter Big Sky Country. You might just encounter some big mysteries. Thank you to all my current subscribers and those of you listening, perhaps for the first time, and joining me for these scary stories. This is my first set of scary stories from Reddit nosleep, and even better, since they are Montana-based nosleep. If you like these terrifying tales and have not done so already, please hit that subscribe button along with the notification bell so you can make sure not to miss a video. As the category nosleep suggests, you might want to keep that light on for a little while longer, especially if you live in Montana. Enjoy! Avoid State Road 200 through Montana. Trust me. By Nick Botic. I'm writing this from a hotel as a warning to anyone that might be making a cross-country trip. We're driving from Seattle to Wisconsin, and last night we were in the middle of nowhere. The fact that Kimmy and I both have a lack of any proper sleep schedule meant that we'd decided to forego a hotel and just drive through the night. We were taken off the freeway due to a detour and ended up on State Road 200, a long, straight road with high hills and mountains on either side. It was startlingly dark outside. The moon was only a sliver, and we thought it was odd that there weren't many stars out. We hadn't seen another vehicle in at least 2 hours. And besides our eyes being relatively adjusted to the darkness, the only light we had was our car's headlights. We'd stopped at what was, without question, the rapiest 24-hour gas station in the country, about 15 miles back, when all of a sudden, we heard what sounded like a gunshot, followed by our front left tire wobbling off the rim. I pulled off to the side of the road and we got out of the car, me to change the tire and Kimmy to hold the flashlight on her phone for me. Out of habit, I turned the car off when we exited, and given that we were in the middle of nowhere, the only sounds surrounding us were cicadas and the trees swaying from the occasional gust of wind. That being the case, the sound of rustling coming from the hills that began a short distance to our left was quite apparent. Kimmy and I both looked across the street behind us, but the darkness only allowed us to see so far. We weren't afraid of anything paranormal or anything like that. Our worry stemmed from the prospect of animals. I went back to getting the tire off, but a few moments later, we heard it again. It sounded like it was off a little ways, so we turned back around and continued, picking up the pace a bit. I had just taken the tire off. The bolts were all collected in an empty McDonald's cup from earlier in our trip. I had turned to my side to grab the spare tire when we heard the sounds again, but this time we ignored them. And then, the brightest light either of us had ever seen flooded the entire area. It was absolutely blinding. We both let out a "what the hell?" and shielded our eyes, trying to find the source of the illumination. My eyes adjusted just enough to see at least 3 massive flood lamps that were spread across the hills. We were more confused than anything because lights aren't really anything to be afraid of. I'm going to illustrate the following image as well as I can. Kimmy must have noticed them first, because she whispered, "What is that?" I squinted my eyes and just barely made out several figures descending the hills towards us. They were just silhouettes in the bright light, just vague shapes of people trudging through the tall grass, all spread out over maybe 25 yards. There was no house, no building, no structure from which the figures emerged, at least none that we could see. That's when I heard something behind us. I quick turned around and saw even more figures. These ones I was able to get a look at. These figures weren't just silhouettes, they were fully visible in the sea of light, and it was infinitely more horrifying. They were dressed in what I can only describe as traditional hillfolk garb. Torn, filthy flannel, blue jean overalls, one stick thin, the next overweight. But it was their faces, or rather what they had over their faces, that truly made my heart sink to my stomach. They wore crudely made circular masks that I would guess were made from paper plates. The faces on the white surfaces were scribbled on, and each one looked to be expressing a different emotion. I hope you can understand why I didn't sit there and examine them. This entire situation had been going on for about 10 seconds at this point. I told Kimmy to get in the car, opening the driver's side door and all but shoving her in. As she crawled into the passenger seat and started the engine, I maneuvered the spare tire on and spun 2 bolts about halfway as far as they could turn before I ran out of time. I yanked the car jack from its spot as hard as I could, dropping the front left of the car to the ground. As the people from our side of the street closed in, I hopped in the car and put it in drive. Instead of slamming on the gas, as I feel anyone would be wont to do in that situation, I lurched forward in an attempt to keep the tire on while still going fast enough to escape whatever the intentions of the hill people were. This lasted for maybe 35 yards before the spare tire broke off and that car wasn't going to go anywhere else. Kimmy and I got out of the car and began sprinting down the road. I looked back and saw the hill people running after us. There must have been 15 of them all spread out across the street. There wasn't really anything on either side of the road, just open land with the occasional tree and the bordering hills. I don't even remember what I was thinking at that moment, but I know that both Kimmy and myself were given a boost of energy when a pair of headlights came into view from atop a hill down the road. I held my phone's flashlight up and pointed it up and down in a sort of rudimentary SOS manner. It then occurred to me that whoever was in the car could have been one of them. But I figured that if that were the case, there was nothing that could be done. So I continued flashing the light. The hill people yelled behind us. It was all incomprehensible, but it definitely sounded threatening. Then the approaching headlights flipped to their high beams. Kimmy and I started waving our arms wildly, hoping that this person would stop, or at the very least not run us over. We had about 20 yards between us and our pursuers when the car slowed to a stop. A man stuck his head out of the window as we sprinted to him and yelled at us to get in, no doubt seeing the masked rednecks behind us, illuminated by his headlights. We both jumped into his back seat and he made a wide U-turn. Kimmy and I looked behind us, and in the red glow that the taillights gave off, we saw our pursuers stop in the middle of the road, then slowly walk off the road in both directions, melting back into the darkness. The man's name was Matthew, and he absolutely saved our lives. We called the police from the car but didn't stop driving until we got to the next gas station, which was about an hour
from where our tire had blown. It wasn't open, but it gave the police somewhere to meet us. They eventually arrived. We talked to them, told them where everything had happened, and after Kimmy's firm refusal to go back to the scene, they drove us to the nearest town and paid for a motel room for us. We're safe now. They have an officer parked right outside our room, so I doubt anything else exciting is going to happen, thus negating the need for an update. I just wanted to get all this down for everyone as a warning. Avoid State Road 200 through Montana at all costs.
I went hunting in Montana. Now I can't leave. By R34 Maniac. I think I've been here for about 3 weeks now. I started to lose track after 9 days. I have no windows, so I have no way to get a grasp what time of day, let alone what day it is. I think I'm somewhere near the crazy mountain still, but I'm not sure as they rendered me unconscious before they brought me here. I don't know who they are, but I assume they're some kind of shadow government branch, as they all have patches that somewhat resemble the emblems the military uses to exhibit rank. They don't ever talk to me or even really acknowledge me unless they're running experiments that require interaction. I'm so confused and scared. I have no idea what's going on. All I do know is if I don't get out of here soon, my body won't be able to keep up with the heinous things they've been doing to me. It all started with my father and I's yearly elk hunting trip in the Crazies. Around 4:30 a.m., I hear my dad's 90s model SUV crunch through the gravel in the driveway. He always has to leave at the crack of dawn. I kiss my sleeping wife goodbye and give both my dogs a generous amount of belly rubs. As I open the front door to leave, my wife comes up running with my hunting license and tags in her hand. "What would you do without me?" she asks in a sleepy tone. "Crash and burn, baby. Crash and burn," I reply. "Be safe, Eddie. I don't know how I could go on without you," she said to me as she gave me a long hug and kiss. "I'll be home in a week, maybe sooner if we both fill our tags fast," I reassured her. As I shut the door behind me, I wish I would have known how awfully wrong I was. I woke up as we pulled into an unfamiliar trailhead just as the sun broke the horizon. "This isn't our normal spot," I grumbled half awake. "I thought we'd try something new this year," he said. I didn't understand why he had made this decision since we had each harvested a bull from our old spot 2 years in a row. I didn't question it, seeing how my father has been traipsing around this mountain range for the better part of 40 years. We didn't talk much as we got all our gear together to prepare for our week in the wilderness. I went right inside the tree line to take a leak before I put my bib overalls on. As I was walking through the parking lot, I noticed 2 identical vans parked next to each other. "Weird," I said to myself. There was no sign of anyone near the vans, but I swear the parking lot was empty when we pulled in. I probably just didn't notice since I was half awake. I finished relieving myself and went to the truck to finish getting my pack together. We sat and finished our coffee as we discussed our game plan for the day. Then, with all gear on our backs, we started our hike for the day. The first few hours were fairly normal. We hiked to the top of the first ridge and started glassing the other ridge lines to see if there was any animals worth pursuing. We didn't see any sign of anything for the first 2 hours, which is strange as these mountains are usually teeming with life. We walked along the ridgeline for about half a mile until we came to a cliff edge that was prohibiting us from continuing. As we were resting, eating our lunch, I heard what I thought was one or two people crashing through the woods behind us. As I stood up, I saw two people wearing hunter's orange running from what looked like a highly modified drone, shooting and swooping at them as it chased them. I stood up and waved my arms, trying to warn them, but as soon as they saw me, they had both ran right off the edge of the cliff. I stood as still as possible, hoping the drone wouldn't notice us. As I stepped backwards, a twig crunched under my boot. I had no time to react, and the drone was 3 feet away from my face. I tried to run, but it sprayed a yellow gas out of the front that rendered my entire body useless. I could still see and feel, but I was paralyzed otherwise. The drone then lowered and landed on the ground in front of my father and I. 4 men in dark uniforms came out of the woods directly in front of us and examined their catch. One of them packed up the drone into a fancy case while the others blindfolded me and proceeded to knock me unconscious. That's all I remember up until waking up in this very room around 3 weeks ago. They had taken everything from me except my phone for some reason. They must have thought the building blocked all signal, but I get just enough to write and post on here. My phone is about now at 2%, so I figured it was time to post this and maybe get some help. As I write this, I swear I hear gunshots outside my room, but I can't quite tell. If I get out of here and get to safety, I'll try and keep you guys updated. Until then, stay safe and wish me luck. E. Stories from the Road, Part 1, by Nick Botic. I know there's a lot of stories from truck drivers floating around the internet. I also know that a lot of these stories feature similar elements to each other, and some of those elements I've experienced myself. What I'm here to share, though, are some things that I've gone through on the road that I haven't seen regaled elsewhere. I've been driving for the last 9 years, and I've loved it since the moment I started my first job. I work independently, meaning that I bid for delivery contracts against other driving services, be they independent or companies. I'm not married and I have no kids, so driving around the country is ideal for me. Doing so independently allows me to pick and choose where I go and when. Driving alone at night on an empty road can be a bit unsettling, despite listening to movies, TV shows, and music all the while. It's the solidarity of driving for hours without seeing another living soul, that fact that if something were to happen, no one would be around to hear you scream, that make the prospect a bit off-putting. The rules of No Sleep state that only one story is allowed per post, so I will do my best to provide as much detail in each of my tales to make it worth your while. Back in 2011, I was tasked with hauling a load from the distributor in Detroit, Michigan to Seattle, Washington, and due to overnight construction on the interstate, I needed to take a road called Montana Highway 200. That road is the epitome of what I described earlier. Hours of driving without seeing another living soul. Due to my schedule, I found myself traversing this stretch of road around 11 p.m. I was wide awake though, so I decided to push on. I was about 130 miles east of the city of Great Falls, Montana, and I was watching one show or another, just kinda spacing out as I drove through the dark. All the electronics of my rig suddenly flickered. The laptop screen went black for a few quick moments, as did the headlights and the lights on the side of the truck. After a few seconds, all was fine, though I was a bit perturbed because the lights on the truck were the only lights around me. Without them, I couldn't see more than 20 feet in any direction. I continued driving for another few miles and everything flickered a few more times. I came up over a hill and the headlights dimmed severely to the point I could only see a few feet past the front of the truck. As I reached the bottom of the hill, the lights suddenly surged. The brights were brighter than they'd ever been. The interior lights on the truck were on at 110 power. The orange lights on the side of the truck glowed brightly into the darkness that surrounded me. And with that, the truck shut off. I came rolling to a stop at the bottom of the hill and spent some time trying to fix the issue, ultimately finding myself unable to get the truck started back up. I pulled my phone out of my pocket and of course, I had no signal. With nothing in front of or behind me for 50 miles, and the fact that I hadn't seen another vehicle on this road since I got on it, I decided the only thing I could really do is try and get a signal on my phone to call AAA. I grabbed a flashlight, got out of the truck, and began doing the ever-popular hold your phone up in the air move while I walked aimlessly in the dark. I think it was because I was so focused on the truck and my phone that I didn't realize how terrifying it was out there. The stars weren't very bright, and the moon was resting comfortably behind the trees in the distance. Being at the bottom of a hill didn't help. I stayed close to the truck, but wandered around a bit looking for any semblance of a signal. When I still couldn't get any, I shined my flashlight around a bit and saw a hill on the opposite side of the road. Just as I was going to go to the hill, I saw a light in the distance, the unmistakable glow of headlights. I breathed a sigh of relief, then looked down at my phone, then back up, and the lights were substantially closer than they just had been, much too close for a car to be driving. Then I blinked, and once again they were gone. But at that same moment, it was like the sounds of the world stopped. Cicadas in the distance ceased. Crickets went silent. And the sound of blowing wind evaporated, and with that, it was completely, deafeningly, ear-shatteringly silent. It was so quiet that it was disorienting. I leaned against the truck while I got my bearings, and then once again tried to find the lights that had been driving toward me, but I couldn't see them. I shined my flashlight around me, out into the distance, trying to find the hill I had wanted to climb to try and get signal on my phone, but I was taken aback when something else caught my eye. A door. Off the side of the road, maybe 10 to 15 yards out, there was a door. It was a door like any one you'd find in a house. Intrigued, I walked over to it with a cautious reserve. It was in a frame and had a doorknob and everything. As I got closer, I felt an overwhelming wave of anxiety come over me. I wasn't scared necessarily, but rather nervous. I didn't know what was going on. I couldn't hear anything. A car may or may not have been heading in my direction, and there was a door standing in what was quite literally the middle of nowhere. It was just an overload of things I didn't understand. I reached the door and walked around it, and it was just that, a door, standing free in the middle of a huge open field, Now that I was closer, I could see that there was a design in the door. Flowers, to be precise. Painted in very light pastel colors. So light that even if it was in the middle of the day, I wouldn't have been able to see them from where I'd first noticed the door. As I was inspecting it, my sense of hearing returned, and I was hit with a flood of noise. Like the lights that amplified a short time prior, the sounds blared like my head was inside a speaker. The sounds of crickets and cicadas nearly brought me to my knees before they returned to normal levels. I had barely had a chance to collect myself when I saw movement near the front of the truck. I shined my light towards it, and for a split second I saw a glimpse of what looked like a person moving from my line of vision to behind the truck. I yelled out to whoever it was with a generic "Hey!" and abandoned my interest in the door. I lightly jogged over to the truck, and with the same cautious reserve, I turned the corner to see who was by the truck. The same thing happened though, and as I turned the corner, so did whoever it was that was there, only at the other end of the truck. And I saw the same glimpse of a possible person now moving behind the trailer. Instead of chasing them the way they were going, I moved in the opposite direction and tried to meet them around the other side of the truck. But when I did, I saw no one. I couldn't hear any footsteps or anything. It was like I'd imagined someone there, only I know I hadn't. I decided to look under the truck to see if I could see the feet of whoever it was. I crouched down, got as low as I needed to see underneath the trailer, and shined my flashlight. Of course, I saw no one. But at that moment, I felt eyes on me. The feeling was unmistakable. I'm sure you know the one I'm talking about. I slowly stood back up and shuddered when I was finally upright. I then felt a warm breath on my neck and quickly spun around, only to find myself face to face with someone. I still don't know what I was looking at. Their face was a blur, like it was vibrating almost, but not. I know that's a terrible description, but the only way I can think of it is to put it, if you've ever seen the show The Flash, think of Reverse Flash, but only their face. The only feature I could make out was actually a lack of feature. Where eyes would have been, though I wouldn't have been able to really see them properly, there was just a solid black, like the sockets were hollow. They were wearing a suit, but it was like an amalgam of other suits, a patchwork array of different fabrics and monochromatic colors all sewn together. Though it was all done very precisely, like you could actually go into a store and buy it, it wasn't sloppy in the least. Finally, on their head was a top hat, though a subtle one. It was a dark gray, almost gunmetal, and somehow it, as well as the rest of their body, was still. Only their face seemed to be out of focus. I was frozen in fear, once again consumed by the anxiety caused by the unknown and familiar. I simply stood there, face to face with this person for what seemed like an eternity, though in reality it couldn't have been more than 2, maybe 3 seconds. I then felt another warm breath on the back of my neck, which made me instinctively shudder and spin around, only there was no one behind me. Upon seeing this, I turned around once again to keep my eyes on whoever I had just been face to face with, only they were gone. I was alone once again. The feeling of being watched was gone. I was standing next to the truck by myself. The normal sounds of the night surrounding me and the crippling feeling of anxiety had dissipated. The orange lights on the side of the truck then flickered back on, as did the headlights. I cautiously walked around to the driver's side of the truck and climbed in, finding that when I'd gotten out of the truck, I had left the keys in the ignition turned to the point that the electrics in the vehicle would be on. I closed the door and attempted to start the truck, and was relieved when there was a rumbling, then the roar of the engine. I didn't think twice before putting it into gear and continuing down Montana Highway 200. There were so many aspects of that night that I didn't understand. I finished the job, and all the while I was trying to rationalize what had happened and why. It was all so confusing, but it would not be the last time I encountered the same aspects of what happened that night. The person with the vibrating face, the sound and light surges, and that door. That flowery, pastel freestanding door. I would see them again about 8 months later. Thanks again for joining me for these 3 Montana no sleep scary stories. If you enjoyed this episode, please hit that subscribe button and that notification bell to know when the latest horror is available. Want to hear your true or fictional scary story narrated by me on this channel? See the description below for how to submit your story. If you like no sleep or creepypasta, what is your favorite topic or monster? Put your answer in the comment section below, and stay safe out there. I'll see you in your nightmares. Good night.